Okay, so here's the plan. We have an idea to do a sequel to one of the most beloved RPGs of all time, Chrono Trigger. Amazing RPG, lots of fans.
Hey Hans, got a great idea for a game. So it'll be Call of Duty, like 77, except we replace the Nazis with zombies.
Wonderful. Handful of money.
So, like I was saying, sold amazingly well on the Super Nintendo, had an amazing life in re releases across the Nintendo DS, as well as Steam, sold a ton of copies, still a beloved franchise, even though not much has been done with it in the last 20 years.
Hey, sorry to interrupt, buddy, but great idea from the team. What if we jumped into all the money in those farm sim games everyone's addicted to, but they only get the farm equipment with microtransactions?
I love that. Take two handfuls. You were saying it was trigger something.
Yeah, Chrono Trigger. One of the most beloved franchises of all time. Hasn't had a sequel since Chrono Cross. Obviously, there's a lot of demand for it. There's fan-made content out there. We interfered with them releasing the finished product in the late 2000s. Got lampooned by fans and media outlets alike for it.
Hey, buddy, just want to give you one more idea before I see you in Vegas this weekend. So, we just change the textures, get all the mods from those suckers who fixed our game for free, change the textures a bit, roll out like Fallout 177 or whatever we're on, and the only way to fix all the bugs is to put them in buying a DLC.
That's awesome. Take more money. Please continue.
See you this weekend.
So insane potential for us to make a ton of money and put out an amazing game with a sequel. Thoughts?
What I heard was we've hit a ceiling for the profitability of this game, and there's no more money to actually be had. Unless... Is it Batman?
No.
Spider-Man?
No!
Pass.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Unqualified Experts. I'm your corrupt overlord Shane.
And I'm your other host, Braden Gardner.
And here we have a topic that I don't know about you, but I have been looking forward to this one ever since it went on the spreadsheet.
This is a very exciting topic for us. Today we're going to talk about some of the game franchises that we feel deserve a sequel, but haven't gotten one for one reason or another.
Or a remake in some cases, because with video games, sometimes you can make a legitimate argument for both, especially if you have those classic NES or SNES games that you love, and the graphics just don't hold up 30 years later, but the game was so good. And so we each got a list of, well, so many, but we tried to cut it down to 3, so we wouldn't keep you here all day about the 3 each of us are really excited. They're not on the docket, they're not scheduled, but hopefully, I don't know, maybe someone randomly sees this or forwards it to a gaming exec who has some pull, because seeing a remake or sequel to each of these games or those games would be amazing. And so we're going to dive right into it, so Braden, kick it off.
So, if you've watched me stream for any period of time, it's no secret that I'm a retro gamer through and through.
You're a retro gamer?
Really? Anyway, so all 3 of my picks are going to be from older games or franchises that haven't gotten the love that they're due in recent years. And the first one is one that I've played various games of actually on stream, and that's the Mega Man X franchise. Now, I understand this might be a somewhat controversial pick, because the Mega Man franchise as a whole, across Classic, and X, and Legends, and Zero, and ZX, and Battle Network, has had dozens of games across the spectrum of Mega Man. However, realistically, there haven't been real good story developments between franchises in the timeline. And Mega Man X in particular exemplifies this because the series was actually originally supposed to end with X5, which was released on the PS1 way back when. And then we got 3 more X games because the franchise was popular. And X8 left us with a number of questions. What happens between Lumine and Axel at the end of the game? What is the next step in Reploid evolution? There's some heavy stuff there that just never actually gets explored. And the Mega Man franchise as a whole is already infuriating about how it sprinkles details about what happens between different parts of its timeline. Like, we know, for example, in Classic, Dr. Light made X and Wily made 0, and something happened between the events of the Classic Mega Man series to lead us to the X series, and that's never really all that well laid out. And then moving from X to 0, we know that we've moved from one series of wars to another series of wars. And again, how we got from point A to point B just isn't terribly well laid out. And we as players never actually really get to experience those moments. So we are kind of left guessing and grasping at straws based on the small details that are sprinkled throughout games across the different franchises. So that's kind of frustrating to have so many open-ended plot developments in this particular iteration, which is why I picked it over something like the Classic series, which got access to Mega Man 11 3 years ago, or the Zero series, which was actually a pretty well self-encapsulated 4-game series.
And yet, who knew the world needs another Mega Man? Just one.
Exactly, and in particular, the first iteration of Mega Man X was such a well-designed game. Like, it had a level of nuance and complexity and exploration and discovery far above that of the Classic series when it came out, and that's kind of what drew me to it to begin with. I'm not saying that replicating that success is particularly easy, particularly given some of the rather dramatic mistakes made in the later part of the X series as far as design, development, gameplay, what have you. But I think the potential is really there, particularly since Mega Man's 9, 10, and 11 were all well received, even after long gaps between games. I mean, the gap between 10 and 11 was 8 years. There's no reason we can't do this with X9, and it could be an amazing game. Or hell, if X9 is too much of an ask and they just don't feel like exploring that space or can't write a decent story for whatever reason, I would also be totally fine with going to a sequel of the Maverick Hunter X series that they tried the first game on for PSP back in 2006. Getting to actually see voice-acted characters, delving into actual motivations and plot and alternate characters. There's a lot you could do with that, too, but my hopes aren't quite as high for that one because the sales for that weren't quite as good as any number of the other games just directly in the series, but I would take either to be perfectly clear.
Nice. And for my first pick, I'm actually going the remake route as opposed to sequel. And this one is Final Fantasy VI, or 3 as it was released in the US.
Good choice.
This is one I've wanted to see a remake to for, hard to believe, 2 decades. Ever since even the PS2, when the graphic jumps are so huge. I mean, look, this is third because it's the I want this, but I also don't trust any big gaming companies not to screw it up. So
that's fair.
It puts you in a place. I mean, unequivocally, Final Fantasy VI is unquestionably one of the best RPGs that has ever been made for any video game system. The story is incredible, the characters diverse, I would argue it's just legendary. It had mechanics you haven't seen in many other RPGs until afterwards. It was trailblazing in so many ways. The writing was so good. The storyline was expansive. You kind of got two games in one, because you had Pre-Apocalypse, which was an incredible traditional RPG kind of itself. And then you had Post-Apocalypse, because you all lost. And now you have to pick up the pieces and see what you can do. And that was just unheard of back then. And it's honestly something you don't even see that often nowadays either. And with that, I'm just imagining the classic scenes, like the famous opera that everyone who's played this game remembers. Imagine that with actual opera singers and voice actresses. Imagine the incredible graphics that could create this in just amazing scene between the music, the symphony, the graphics of magic going off in the background. Think of the ghost train as you were just pursuing the family on the way to the afterlife. Imagine the mechs, like these not cyberpunk, steampunk type machines going up against magical beings with modern graphics. That means a single, just normal battle could be absolutely stunning and incredible if it's done right. This is the type of game where the story's legendary. There's a fan base that adores this game after 3 decades. This could be the magnum opus of a studio's entire career. They could make, if they did this right, did it with fans who love the game and could explain why they love the game, did it with people who got into gaming because of classic RPGs like this, they could develop the type of game that could just be stunning. The type that we're talking about, again, another 30 years from now. And the fear is obvious. A money grab that would ruin it. And it gives a fair question. Can a game that's so legendary, clearly the best Final Fantasy ever, Phil and Final Fantasy VII Bros, come at me. I'm willing to street fight that one. Can a game that's so legendary, so built up on a fan base that you could argue is fanatical, could you ever do it well enough to satisfy them? And I don't know if you can. Is the legend too big even compared to the actual game? But if you have a group who is willing to give it the effort it deserves and willing to take years to develop that game, it's absolutely worth it to the studio who's willing to do it right. And I would love to see that remake done.
Huh? Oh, I stopped paying attention after you said imagine chasing the train, and now I've spent your entire explanation visualizing suplexing the train in HD. Sorry.
Oh, I forgot you could suplex the train. That'd be
right? Doing that in HD would just be... Getting an actual updated view of doing that would just be so satisfying.
On every level, including possibly some new ones we didn't know existed until now.
So, moving along with the idea of actually getting sequels for some of the best RPGs of all time, Final Fantasy VI is great, and I would argue it's one of my top 2 picks for the SNES, depending on the day that you ask me. Because it's really hard to pick between that and Chrono Trigger as to which is the best RPG on the system, because much like Final Fantasy VI, Chrono Trigger really shifted the paradigm of what you could do with an RPG. Final Fantasy VI told an epic. You got 2 mainline stories in the same game that really painted a picture of probably the grandest RPG plot to date when it came out.
Easily.
Chrono Trigger wasn't an opus quite on that scale. It was, however, one of the most well-written stories for an RPG to ever grace an early retro console, and it also managed to do that with time travel, which adds so many layers of complexity to any type of storytelling.
And is so hard to do well and so hard to do right, which they nailed on both counts.
They absolutely did. It was just so well done, and you got to explore a series of different worlds, but they were still the same world, and you got several unique experiences simultaneously rather than 2 longer experiences designed to each be part of an overarching epic. So, both legendary RPGs, they just did that in two very different ways. And Chrono Trigger made my list because I've actually seen the result of some of the potential that's being missed out on by Square Enix. And that's through the fan project Crimson Echoes. Now, those of you who are familiar with the Chrono series are probably also well familiar with Chrono Trigger's sequel, Chrono Cross, which came out on the PS1 and was basically meant to take place in the same world but with different characters, but referencing a lot of the events that happened in Chrono Trigger. Crimson Echoes is meant to kind of be a middle ground between the two games, utilizing the same look and feel as Chrono Trigger, but referencing the events of both games with the cast of characters from Chrono Trigger. It still has the same amazing storytelling, there's lots of exploration and secrets, the plot is top-notch. Like, as is often the case with franchises that are abandoned by the owners of the intellectual property, the fans are really good at picking up the slack and building something that's a labor of love that really resonates on a level that is either equal to or sometimes even superior to the original material. And you were really on the cusp of getting that with Crimson Echoes. The developers got about 98% of the way through the game's development, and then they got hit with a cease and desist from Square Enix.
Wow.
And to be clear, that was their prerogative. Yeah. They're the owners of the intellectual property. But the fact that they did that and then proceeded to continue doing nothing with the franchise for... I mean, this cease and desist came out in 2009, and it's 2021 now. It's just criminal.
Insane missed opportunity by... yeah.
It bums me out, because almost having it and then just having the polish snatched away so that it can never truly live up, but still be a great game with what you're able to find, it hurts on a level that just resonates far more deeply than any of the other entries on my list.
Yeah, and one of the big tragedies of that, from my point of view, is you had this independent development that got you so close to a complete project. Make a deal with the fans. You had to invest no employees into this, no time, no effort, no planning. And you easily could have said, look, this is our copyright material, but we like what you're doing. Let's get a contract and figure this out. And as a creative, like, I understand when you want to make something out of love that you just share with the world for free, but if the choice is, okay, make some money and split with a passion project or never finish the project, I want to finish the project. Let's find a way to work it out. And just clearly one of the all-time missed opportunities with that one, in my opinion.
Agreed.
By the way, smooth transition. I like that. Right to Final Fantasy II Chrono.
Oh, yeah.
That's solid.
Yeah.
Professional, even. Unlike this. Anyway, my second choice. I don't know whether this will be a sequel or an expansion, but I would like to talk about the game Verdant Skies. And for those of you who did not read my article on the website, which we will link below on Best Games Like Stardew Valley, first of all, one, shame on you. Ned Flanders finger wag.
Don't shame our viewers.
It was just a little. I just did it twice. I didn't do it 3 times.
Oh, okay. I mean, as long as there's only 2.
You're missing out. But Verdant Skies is one of my favorite games on that list, and I didn't expect it to be. I am not even completely sure how I found out about this game, to be honest. It flew under the radar of a lot of us. It starts with you going to this alien world for a project that promised a thriving colony where you could be part of the production and advancement. And let's just say your entry starts with a crash landing where you barely make it out alive, and it kind of goes downhill from there. But the really hilarious and well-written opening sets up a really incredible world that blew me away. This is a game that independently developed. Very small team, very small crew, and very small budget. But they produced something really unique and something really awesome. So if you think of it with kind of slice of life Stardew Valley, but on an alien planet. Fishing? Well, instead of competing with all those terrible fishing games, they went the other direction. Here's a harpoon. Enjoy spearfishing. And it's so enjoyable. And if you upgrade, you can try spearing 2 or 3 at a time. And it's a really simple but really fun mechanic that's just different. You're scavenging wreckage from your spaceship because I told you it was a rough landing coming into the planet. You don't just get to grow crops. You get to clone various crops. So I don't want to replant all the time. Cool, I'm going to create ones that replant or that water themselves or that are worth more money because I don't want a house. I want a mansion on this alien world. It gives you a lot of options. You have to capture and clone alien livestock, and they actually look alien. You have building up the colony. You explore marshes, mountains, and the graphics are incredible. Like, you feel like you are exploring an alien world unlike anything else you've seen in gaming. And it really sets it apart from all the slice of life and farming sim games, and adds an extra bit of exploration and wonder that can be really hard to capture. Because you really do feel like that you are exploring this new world, you are finding this new place. And the discoveries are really, really cool, especially as you unlock the ability to do more and more things and to explore more of what's been programmed in. Now, there is an important caveat here. If you're from a very conservative background or family, skip the game. And the reason I say that is, while there's nothing explicit at all in the game, there are topics that some people are uncomfortable with. Polyamorous relationships, same-sex love interests. There is a very well-done character who's a trans character. If those are things that make you uncomfortable or it's not your wheelhouse, just skip it. But one of the things about this game that I love was how they handled all those things. They handled it as, wait for it, normal.
What a concept.
Yeah, it wasn't the defining trait of any of the characters. Some of them, if you decide to pursue them as an interest, like, okay, I'm open to dating other people, so are you. One of them is, you're welcome to make sure you're making the right decision with me. I'm just going to stay loyal. Some of them are like, look, I appreciate this. It's your choice, but I'm a one-person type of guy or gal. And they just treat it as normal. It is just another discussion, another thing that makes each character who they are. It's dealt with very well. It's not a caricature of any of those things. It's not a thinly veiled social political message. It's just another part of this person in your growing community of friends and support. And that's really, really done. Well done. Direct, honest conversation. And it's a really cool thing. And to be clear, this is a small part of the game. It is part of the social aspect that you can choose to be with multiple characters. You can choose to not pursue any of them and just do your own thing. But because so many people consider some of these topics political, social taboo, I want to put that out forward. The game itself, is a Stardew Valley like on an alien planet. You're building a colony. You are meeting some very, very weird and interesting characters who are really cool. You get to use DNA splicers, which just, you're still making like an alien cow, but it just seems more exciting somehow when you're splicing DNA. I don't know why. The little mad scientist in us all.
Little?
It is a stunningly, stunningly beautiful world. The graphics are amazing. The different plant life, the animal life, the alien life, the unique bugs, the unique graphics. It's just a really incredibly well done game. And the thing is, you can tell it was a very small team with limited time, limited budget, limited exposure. Which means it's one of those games where you have a solid 13 to 20 hours to play, and you want 100. You want 150. And that's why it's my pick here, because maybe better than any other game I've seen, they've created a really, really new world. They capture the best of a Stardew Valley, of a My Time at Portia. They put you on an alien planet that's not like, oh look, it's Earth, but the corn is red, haha. It is actually different. It works differently, it functions differently. It just feels like you're actually exploring a new place as opposed to just getting something rehashed. And it's one of those where taking what they've learned from the original game and the things that worked really well, the stuff that they wish they could have had more time for, if you get the original team with more funding, a little bit more support, so they could take this world that's relatively small area right now and just grow it out maybe 5-10 times, you would really have truly, truly stunning games. Something that could be, once again, one of those epics that you talk about for years and years. One of those games that has legs years after it's been released. And you just don't find too many of them. But clearly the potential's there. And so Verdant Skies, extremely good game. One that I would love to see a sequel or major expansion to.
So, if you had the choice, would it be a sequel or would it be something kind of akin to Stardew Valley where they go out and make a bunch of updates over the course of a few years?
I think I would probably go the Stardew Valley route where you take the world you know and just keep expanding it. With that said, I won't be disappointed either way. Because I do feel like that the one downside of having kind of these small teams, small budget early on is, you know, the social advancements and storylines of each character are kind of already set in.
Fair enough.
And so it feels like if they didn't have any restrictions, the stories behind each character might have been twice as long or 2.5 times long. And most of them are really fascinating. They're very nuanced. They're extremely well done. Most of them. But most of them are pretty fantastic. And I feel like they're very, very good now. They could have stretched out the story even more if they had the ability. Where a Stardew Valley-like type expansion, they might not be able to do that. But at the same time, they would go winner either way. Because even a sequel would not be your traditional Contra, Super Contra, or Part 1, Part 2. It would be this type of world, just without the confines that force them to be in a very limited area for the first game.
Fair enough. I haven't played Verdant Skies, so I don't have a lot of opinions on it myself, but I know that games that are open world like that have a tendency to really suck me in and cost me dozens and dozens of hours of time that I just don't have right now, but I could see good arguments either way there, and I like there are more games like Stardew Valley making their way out into the gaming world.
And he's heard me praise this game multiple times. And so thank you for the patience for listening to me ramble about a game you have never watched or played.
I mean, all fair. I might have to ask you to return the favor on my last pick. And that's because it's one of my favorite games on the NES. It's kind of an obscure one. Big shocker to see it on this list because it topped my list of underrated NES games. My last pick for a game that I really want to see a sequel to is The Guardian Legend. For those who aren't familiar with the gameplay, it's a hybrid gameplay type game where you have exploration of biomes and weapon collection as part of it, and then space battles for the other part, not unlike something you might see with Gradius or Life Force. And the gameplay meshes together super well in both aspects. The problem being that while this is a standalone game with a fairly straightforward plot that's neatly wrapped up, it's not anything particularly special. You're going to a planet, you're disabling safety seals, you're killing monsters, and ultimately trying to save the Earth. But we don't really get to meet our protagonist. We know basically nothing about them, other than they're awesome at kicking all kinds of ass. Which is great, but the NES was over 30 years ago. Like, this game has been out a long time, and it would be super cool to see a reimagining of it with current graphics. You could either go about this with the top-down view like you got in the original, or with the original, which was Gardic, which we don't talk about because it's not really all that interesting a game by comparison. Or you could go the route of something akin to Metroid Prime, where the biome exploration is done as more of a first-person view, and then you have either something akin to what Star Citizen kind of should have been for space battles for the actual space fights, or you could go to a bullet hell style setup, maybe with a little less of the hell just to keep the difficulty within reason. Like, the number of directions you could go with a remake or a sequel to this game are stunning, but it's not a well-known franchise. This is the one that is least likely to get its next day in the sun out of the three that I've picked, which makes me sad because it's kind of the one that I would love to see the most because it's got the most unexplored potential.
Neat. Yeah, those, I mean, you don't know your protagonist, you just know you can kick butt. That is a classic NES protagonist right there.
Yep.
And I remember you streaming that. That was a fun game to watch. So, for my number one, and since we're talking about, remakes and retro, let's go with that good old Season 1 drum roll. Is for the love of God, give the Fallout series to Obsidian.
Oh,
Which I guess technically is a sequel. So, Fallout 4 received a lot of love, and there was a lot of good things about it. It was a cool game. There was all kinds of things they brought in and tried that were interesting, but there were also a lot of mixed feelings from longtime Fallout fans that felt like it was kind of starting to lose a little bit of the identity. And, we'll get to the sin against all humanity in a little bit that followed. But, looking back at Fallout New Vegas, first of all, if you're not familiar with this story as a gamer, you have some internet reading to do.
Yeah, there's a fair bit.
And I'm going to point out that there were so many contradicting POVs and allegations and allegedlys that it's really kind of impossible to know the whole story. So I will give the bullet points with the clear, this is all alleged, we're not saying any of this happened, don't sue us, bro. So Obsidian was contracted to do Fallout New Vegas from Bethesda. And the back and forth stories, among the complaints were a broken and buggy game engine from Fallout 3, which many of us who even enjoyed the game had experienced at one time or another. Major lack of support from Bethesda. A really ludicrous contract, even by gaming industry standards, regarding a Metacritic score that they missed by 1 point. And there are all kinds of side stories about shenanigans with that, which may be internet farcity, there might be smoke, who knows. All kinds of insane arguments come from that. There's your 8 hours of rabbit hole reading where you don't end up knowing what happened. And above all of that, there was an impossibly short deadline. These games usually take 4, 5, 6 years to develop. It was dropped in their lap, and these are tools that you're not even familiar with using, and you better have that game done in 18 months.
Oi.
Impossible deadlines. So what happens? They make arguably the best Fallout game in history, despite the bugs and the other issues, in 18 months. Now, whether you're with the group that thinks New Vegas was the best Fallout game or wasn't, or you're hot against that, there is no argument that as far as being a masterclass in how an RPG should go, that game was a masterclass in writing, story, creating a vivid post-apocalyptic world, and actually creating decisions that mattered. The fact that how the game ends is, there's 5 different endings depending on exactly which faction you want to win, was just mind-blowing to me because it radically changed what happens in that part of the world, which is something a lot of the other games. You had kind of a bad ending and a good ending, maybe? But in the end, there weren't a lot of changes, whereas this one, nope. Are you giving Las Vegas to the California Allies? Are you giving them to the Roman slavers? Are you saying, you know what, robot army, I'll take that. All of you leave now or else. You can imagine which option I chose every single time.
Yeah, I'm with you. That's the one.
I mean, I did the save to see what the others did, but it was always going to be that one.
And good on you. I wouldn't have.
The soundtrack was incredible. The world felt extremely real, and just because of all the different endings, it was just so good. It was so well put together. There were some amazing factions. To me, it was in-depth, really the best Fallout game in a lot of ways, but not even close. Now, That was done 18 months with a buggy engine, without being able to do a lot of play testing, without being able to do the beta tests you usually would, without the normal amount of programmers. Everything was rushed. And I look at, they still managed to put out a game that I liked it better than Fallout 4. That will be controversial with a few players, but there are just many who will agree with me. And then there's that abomination, the sin against all gamers and possibly humanity that was Fallout 76.
Oh, yeah.
Is that really the direction you want the Fallout series going versus, oh, look at this rushed, hurried, underfunded, and possibly mildly sabotaged story that provided an amazing game? Look, I don't know. We know beyond a doubt there is a lot wrong with any Obsidian-Bethesda relationship. But whatever the issues are, this feels like the one we need some kind of gaming god guidance counselor to sit them down, figure out what the problems are, and take away whoever thought Fallout 76 was a good idea, banish them forever to whatever shadow realm you have in the halls of Microsoft, and hand the Fallout series to Obsidian, and give them the funding and support they need. And if they need some house cleaning to make sure these problems don't repeat, do it. But when you look at everything was stacked against Obsidian for even getting a game out, and then they provided arguably the best Fallout game, that even if you argue with that, it's not the writing and the story and the characters and the choices you're arguing with. It's the fact they had 18 months and couldn't play test everything. Or the buggy system that needed to be replaced after Fallout 3. Fallout games made by Obsidian, who made New Vegas, who had 4 or 5 years instead of 18 months, who have a new system that works smoothly instead of an old broken system that gives all kinds of software issues, those are the Fallout games that just could be absolute game changers, that all of us who fell in love with the series want to see, and those are the Fallout games that devoted fans of the series deserve. So, for the love of God, remake, sequel, billionaire who can buy that whole franchise and give it to another company, I don't care. Just let's figure out a way to do this. I want to see some Obsidian Fallout games. It's just, we are long overdue for that quality to return to a series that used to be just the pinnacle of what you could do for gaming.
That's fair. Maybe now that Microsoft's pulling some strings, maybe we will actually have some hope of seeing an uptick in quality there again.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I know.
What's the most recent Fallout 76 controversy after 4 years of still being broken? Yeah, just...
Yeah, I said maybe. In fairness, I kind of envision that like the tire fire on the edge of town. It's always going to be burning.
But if you can keep it from spreading to the woods, maybe that's the best you can hope for.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the way. But now we want to hear from you.
Definitely.
Tell us a little bit about the games that you've played that you'd love to see a remake or a sequel of. There's tons and tons of games out there, and honestly, we've only scratched the surface of games that have not had their potential fully exercised.
Do you want to see a remake? Do you want to see a sequel? Do you have a game where there's a side character you thought needs their entire story? Let us know in the comments. We want to hear about those.
And until next time,
good gaming!
If you like what you just saw, please support us by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more great gaming content.